Ignore the bottle of Everclear. We'll explain that in a minute. I'm here with Bob from rustblue.com, and we're going to try this conservation and rust bluing video one more time. Say hi, Bob.
Hi, Bob.
How about that noise? That's outstanding. Let's go. We're going to explain a few things that all of you have been asking. We've talked about rust bluing and conservation and conversion of ferric oxide, which is red rust, into a ferroferric oxide, which is a black rust. There are lots of chemicals, there are lots of chlorides, there are lots of things on this planet that will cause things to rust. The trick is to find a chemical that will cause the rust to occur at a very slow rate. And then it's controlled, the grain size is small, and we're not digging pits. Those of you that saw the episode that we have up doing the 98K, that gun had 100 years worth of rust put on it in 3 weeks, and the flakes were so big, they almost look like cornflakes. If you want to get deeply into this and blue a lot of guns, this is a book you've got to go find. It was originally published in 1936. There are a lot of modern reprints of this book kicking around. Don't buy a 1936 original collectible book and have it open in your workbench and get chemicals on it. There are enough formulas in here and an explanation of the vernacular so that you know what the wing of bat and eye of newt equates to. But this particular book, Mr. Angier, R.H. Angier, was a Belgian. He was a mechanical engineer. He was a lot of things, but he wrote it all down. And the first 7 pages of this book will explain everything about gear. So now that we're talking about gear, here's something I want you to know. I have a lot of pretty fancy stuff. I have power-driven wire wheels. I have 13 kilowatt boiling pots. I've got all this fancy stuff that makes me go faster, not better. You, on the other hand, can do this in a cardboard box with a tea kettle and a heat source. Let's go find out how the heck that's done. Bob, same wardrobe box from way long time ago, but you've been using this plain old cardboard box for steam and stuff. Show us what's in it, Bob.
Yeah, Mark. I've had this box, believe it or not, since about 2012, and have been bluing guns in it all these years. And
it's a lot older than that, but we'll show you that later.
Turn around and show you how old it is.
Yeah.
But I've been bluing guns, like I said, since 2012 with it. A lot of people told me that it wouldn't last, it would fall to pieces, but here it is. It's survived. It's just corrugated board from the moving company, and I've made some alterations to it. I'm using it as a heating chamber and as a ripening chamber, or a what do you call it, steam box or a humidity box.
Okay.
In order to force the rust onto the metal. The one big adaptation I made, I cut a flap door at the bottom for the introduction of a steam source or a dry heat source.
Okay.
In order to change the environment inside the box.
Okay, and we'll talk about all that when we pull it back apart. We'll get it up on a bench. But right now you're steaming, and what we are steaming...
We're steaming some revolver parts, and we've got those hanging from the crossbar that comes with the box when you get it. And we've just got those parts hanging from iron wire.
Okay.
They've been previously coated with rust blue.
Okay.
And we allowed that to work on the metal for a while. And now we're introducing steam from a tea kettle in the bottom that's on a hot plate.
Okay.
And that steam's filling this box, and that's what's giving us our controlled.
We're trying to get about 100% humidity in it and allow it to rust.
That's
We'll explain all this up on a bench, but this is the hardware, and you don't need, so that heater that's down there, that's just to get the temperature inside the box warm enough.
This is nothing but a typical cube heater that you pick up at your dollar store.
Okay, and that's just for blowing hot air, and in order to get we need to preheat the parts. We'll talk about all that when we get up on the bench. All right.
So you got to alternate between humidity and dry heat in order to get the process done. But the point is, you don't have to go out and buy $1,000 worth of equipment to get in business.
Right.
You can pick up an old cardboard box like this, and as we're going to show you in a minute, you can put together a steam tube, like.
So this is just basically a, oh, I see. You section that off now to make that smaller.
I can make it smaller if I have shorter pieces to do, or taller, like I'm doing a barreled
Right.
action.
And then that comes apart, and then that's where the peg that you're hanging the parts on goes.
The cap comes off. I've notched it here for a crossbar.
And you just hang the parts down in
Hang
it.
the parts inside the tube and steam them.
Can you pull that small tube off? Okay. So that's a toilet bowl flange down there. Let's see if we can pop that out. Of course, it won't come out. There we go. So this is essentially just a $15 Wally World stainless steel pot, and we put a toilet bowl ring in it. Listen to me. That's just a flange.
Just a flange, 5-inch or 3-inch
Right.
toilet flange.
So total, this rig, you've got maybe $30 tied up in it.
30, 35 bucks.
You put about an inch of water in the bottom of this thing, and you don't need to fill the pot up. You only need enough to make steam.
Right.
The steam will rise. We'll use that later on for the conversion process that we'll talk about. But this is Bob's entire toolkit, and this guy runs his own website for selling chemicals for doing this. We'll talk about that later. I'm not here to sell Bob's stuff. I'm just here to show you what he does. Holy cow, Bob. I know you said you're using low-cost materials, but half the guys watching this show weren't even born when headlights were square and you could rent a U-Haul for 20 bucks a day. Yikes! Amateurs practice till they get it right. Professionals practice till they don't get it wrong. My grandfather had an interesting take on this that says amateurs will expend time to conserve materials, but professionals will expend materials to conserve time. Because time is the one thing you have a finite amount of, and every moron walking this planet has the same 24 hours every day. Think about that. What professionals and amateurs in the bluing game have to have in common is prep. I don't care how good your coatings are or how good your rust bluing is. If you didn't prepare the metal underneath it or you didn't prepare the wood underneath your oil job, it's not going to look well. There's something else I want to talk about, prep. And the second thing is the difference between a conservation that I do here at Anvil and straight up from the ground up rust bluing that Bob does. It's the same thing. Once you prepare the metal, you add a chloride bearing solution that has an oxidizer in it that causes the metal to rust. But let's say, for instance, this bayonet was traded to me, and it's quite obvious that this bayonet has spent a lot of its life inside of a frog up to here. But this rust, fine grain, took almost probably 100 years to put this coat of rust on the outside of this, was put on very, very slowly with extremely tight grain. So what's the difference between putting chemicals on the steel and forcing it to rust and having someone else spend 100 years and putting the rust on? We're going to get to a point where we have ferric oxide. We have a red rust all over this. If we oil this, this rust will look a lot like patina. Allow me to demonstrate. Oh, look, patina. It's almost like magic. If we oil this enough, we'll wind up with patina. And yet, the odd thing about it is that the underlying oxidation process will continue underneath this oil, and it will continue to go. We need to cut that off, and by boiling or steaming this ferric oxide, an oxygen molecule will give up an electron. The iron oxide in here, the outer valence shell of the iron will become full. The outer valence shell will be full. The iron will die. The iron is now happy. The iron goes to its happy place, and it does it at a very, very dark blue. In fact, the English call this blacking. It'll go to a very, very, very dark blue, and the hue of blue depends upon how much attention you put into the polish. Noting all of that, rust bluing and conversion to conservation is all the same thing. We're just going to jump in at the second step of the process. So for the rest of the day here, we're going to be looking at like this old Vetterli, this Vetterli action here is rusted up pretty good. We're going to boil this. We're going to boil a couple of other things. And then when we come out of the pot and we've done the bluing, we'll look at several different ways to kill the steel and either oil it, wax it, put an oxidizing oil on it. There's a lot of things you can do afterwards. But it's all basically the same thing. And the difference is when we do this trigger guard and we take all of this oxide and we convert it down, you're still looking at the original finish. You're not changing anything. Amazing. Here we have two examples of rust that was put on quickly and out of control. And I mean, there is texture to this. Give me a zoom, brother. There is texture to this rust. And I'm going to tell you, this gun is, the finish on this weapon is ruined. Not the gun, but the finish is ruined. This is going to get basically taken off with a grinding wheel, and then I'm going to wind up Spartan shielding this thing and just painting it black and being done with it. This bayonet, however, we showed you before, we washed all the oil off of it, and this bayonet had the rust put on it nice and slow, and it's smooth. So we're going to take this thing straight back to the conversion pot. This, I'm going to try real hard to not store this gun in the big green box outside of the shop. And this Vetterli has, this is almost, I'm trying to get the color right. Okay, so this is what the color looks like in the shop right here. It's not that, it's not this. The color is matching right there. And you can see there's a little bit of exposure here. The bottom of this barrel is what this would have looked like when it was new. And this is a bluish, almost a plumish. So what we'll do is we'll convert this Vetterli out. We'll convert this bayonet out. So I'm going to go hang these in Thor right now, and then we're going to roll in here with something that's white. And we're going to talk about cleanliness and surface prep, and we'll put some chemicals on this thing, and we're going to actually blue a gun. Now that revolver you saw hanging in a box, that's Bruno's Spanish-made Smith & Wesson, and that's the Julia Childs, so it'll be done when we're there. Frog in my throat. Anyway, let's go convert some stuff. This is an interwar German side-by-side that we're doing. We've converted it. It's already been through the conversion process. We boiled it out once, and we turned all the rust on this thing into a soft oxide and brushed it off. And as you can see, there was no bluing left on this. This thing was not blue at all. Not blue, a little bit of blue for comparison. And I'm trying to get the lighting to where you can actually see. There's a little bit of blue left on it and nothing. And then you would agree that this piece of bottom metal looks exactly the same as the top. This is going to be our control. So when we roll out of this, this piece of metal is not going to have been blued. So we can get an after on this. All right. Cleanliness is everything. So what we're going to do here, just a little bit of freaking brake cleaner. Why brake cleaner? Not carb cleaner. Carb cleaner has oil in it. Brake cleaner, non-chlorinated brake cleaner, has basically just toluene, a little bit of xylene, some heptane, and maybe some acetone in it. They make chlorinated brake cleaners. You don't really need them, but essentially we're just going to make this thing. We're going to wash it down until we're going to let all the oils just kind of dissolve here. And yeah, I know I'm trashing this towel and I don't care. I'll get another one, but I'm just letting these go. Now, all the oil had been off this before. The oils had been off this before. This has been through a conversion once. If you're going to reblue a gun, you need to at least get all the red rust to stop on it first. We have done no scrubbing. We haven't removed anything. And we're going to do one more thing here after I'm done here, where we're going to show you that you do not have to take the existing finish off of a gun. You don't have to. There we go. That's actually, I know that light's in the way, but that's making the auto iris do what I want it to do. That's what it looks like to my eyes in the room. It's a little bit darker here. I'll get this thing out of the way. Great. So we're going to dissolve any oils. Oil has this tendency to want to creep out from underneath stuff. So I've left this pin here almost to taunt this to do it to me. I would almost expect to see a slight oil bloom happen around this. Those of you guys that are suffering through Cerakote application will know exactly what I'm talking about by burning stuff out. So once we get that cleaned off, you can do this with soap, but it has to stay cool. Do not boil soap. You will turn this metal orange. It will look horrible. You can do it, I think there's some stuff you can buy, and pretty much anything you can get in a big box store. So there you go, it's clean. And even though we boiled it once, I want you to note the grease pattern on this towel from something that had already actually been converted and had the maintenance done on it once. We'll be okay here. So I'm gonna flip this towel over, we'll be right. Hold what you got, stand by for a fade. This is an unused, untouched, under $1 chip brush. Nothing fancy, really, really cheap. We have just a butter tub or whatever the heck this was. A little bit of rust blue, and in this particular case, we're gonna use this American formula, Damascus formula, all that. Talk to Bob about that. He knows all the particulars. But in my particular case, we're just gonna do just a small amount of this. We're not gonna need a whole lot. That's as much as we need to do pretty much the entire receiver. And now, this is where the Everclear pops in. You can use Everclear, any cheap vodka will work up the high end. We're using this because it's alcohol. Dear sweet God, don't drink this stuff. It's radioactive. But all we're going to do is put just a little bit of this alcohol in it, and what it's going to do is act as a wetting agent. Now, why doesn't Bob put the alcohol in? Because it involves a little bit of hydrogen. And while we don't really care about that in a 8,000 cubic foot shop, I think someone would really care if we blew a freaking transport airplane up, don't you? And you see how this wets. It wets. It gets, pull in for me here. I want to show them what I'm talking about. There's no pullback. This is wet all the way to the edges. If there was any oil, you get these little puddles. It would just dry up. But it wets, and we're going to just coat. Now, you'll see a lot of people that will be screaming at you, telling you, oh my God, you have to use, a cotton towel and real thin stripes. Yeah, I believe that on a second pass. The other thing I want you to note is where the case hardening had not worn off of it. See right here, the case hardening is still in there, and we're going to use that to almost give us a faux case hardened effect. Okay, the casing is gone on this. The gun was only new once, and you'll find that it is difficult to blue something that has been cased. But I'm going to go ahead and wet the rest of this down, and then I'm going to show you what this looks like after it has been, we call frogging up, frog-haired up. So we'll be right back. I'm just going to go ahead and paint the rest of this and hang it off a wire, and I'll show you what it looks like when we get done there. By the way, for those of you that were freaking out, oh my God, he allowed a chemical to touch his fingers. Guys, we're not in a production environment here. So we're just shooting a video about what this is and how it works. And in a production environment, you would be gloved up. If I was doing this all day, I don't want it on my fingers or worse in my eyes. So I have since gone and scrubbed down. We're golden. All right, so right now we have wet chemical on these parts, and this wet chemical is attacking these parts. It's pickling them almost, and it's attacking the surface. And we'll let this literally air dry for about 20 to 30 minutes, or we'll go hang it in the heat. One thing that's very important before you get forced moisture anywhere near a rust blued part is you cannot allow the water to condense on the surface and make a little water drop. So there's a sweet spot. How warm do I get this so no water can condense on it versus how hot can I get it and not have it start to convert before it has even begun to build a layer of rust? We found that sweet spot somewhere between 110 to 120 degrees. It's not a precise number, but you just want to warm it up enough that the metal gets to about 110 degrees all the way through. So to quote let's come in from the cooking side. We're gonna sous vide this thing for about an hour, and we're gonna let it be the same temperature all the way through. Then, when it's the same temperature all the way through and it's dry, we're gonna pull it back out. We're gonna put another layer of chemicals on this. This is only on your first pass. On your first track at this, on your first pass, you put the chemicals back on it, dry it back out again, and then we will turn on the steam. We'll start making the water. So essentially it's this: degrease, apply chemical, allow the chemical to attack, warm up to 110 degrees, reapply chemical if you feel like it, and if not, turn on a water vapor and go ahead and make some steam. So let's see what that looks like. These have been hanging now for about 10 minutes, and the chemical is really starting to attack. So what we're going to want to do is hang it in a box, and your jigging system may vary. Mine just happens to look like that. We're going to hang it in this box, and then we're going to create a warm, dry environment inside the box. And the beauty of this particular setup is it's easy to get to. Down in the bottom of this thing, stuck in a hole, is the aforementioned square heater. And all we're going to do with this square heater, right now he's just got it on fan. We're going to turn it up here and put a little heat in it. Or you got it, oh, you got it on high, okay. Okay, so we're just going to put it right in the schnozzle there. And we're going to let the entire inside of this box heat up enough that the parts heat up with it. Just don't get it so hot you can't touch it. Don't worry about the 110 to 120 number. 110 to 120 number is about like what you warm bread up at.
You're trying to get the metal temp up above dew point.
Right.
So that moisture won't condense on it.
The moisture won't condense on it, because if water condenses on this steel while we're trying to blue it, you are done. This thing's going to look like the back of a frog. Yep. So we want to allow this to warm up to the point where it dries out. It's a judgment call on whether or not we're going to want to reapply chemical, but let's say for a normal gun, no. Once it's dry and it's up to temperature, we will then substitute, hand me your pot there. This is how complex his steam application gear is. It's a little hot plate, and on that hot plate sets this tank. Let's set it right up here. So on the hot plate sets this, and this goes up inside the little trapdoor and brings the humidity inside the box up pretty close to saturation.
Yeah, you're looking for 100% humidity,
right,
at about 90 degrees plus Fahrenheit.
Right.
And it'll rust 45 minutes, you got it rust.
And here's what that looks like, because we've got a gun out in front of this so we can show you what it looks like. To the bench. So we've pulled this Smith & Wesson out in front of it, and there's a couple of things I want to point out. Always blue side plate equipped revolvers with the side plate in place. Because if you do not do that, when you go to when you go to card this thing, it's not wire wheeling, it's carding. I don't know why I keep calling it wheeling. When you go to card this, you'll get a white line where that side plate is, because on a sharp edge, as area goes to zero for a given amount of force, pressure goes to infinity, and it'll just take the finish right off the edge. So as you can see here, we've adopted some rust. We don't know what's going on here. Don't sweat it. It'll all come down. We're allowing this now to cool off a little bit. We're going to inspect, and then this is going to go get hung in Thor, and it's going to boil right along with the parts that we're conserving. And when we're all done, I don't think you're going to be able to tell the difference between a part that's been conserved and a part that's been blued. Now on this revolver, the closest thing that I have to a control part is this mainspring. This thing is pretty much natural silver, so you can see where we're at. That was the color this gun was when we started. It had been worn completely white. So we'll be using this spring as our way to tell what the before is. So we're gonna go hang this thing in Thor and let it boil for, well, when you're converting applied coatings like this, 35, 40 minutes tops. When you're doing conservations, 45 minutes at a minimum, multiple times. We'll get to that here in a second, but let's go get this thing hung. After about 45 minutes in a conversion pot, this still looks like it's rusted, but it's not, because this stuff will convert right off. And this will tell you how deep the rust is on this Vetterli. Is when we wear down to the bottom of it and we get all that loose oxide off the top. Look at that. Now you couldn't do that before. If you'd have tried to just wire wheel this, it would have gone from red to silver. The true oxide layer, right? There we go. That's actually converting down really nice, and we'll work on that a little bit more. This is not a wire wheel. This is a carding wheel. And again, everybody's going to want to know where, and we're going to show you guys the part number for this wheel. Do you need it? No. Think of this as a piece of steel wool that's whirling around. That makes my life simpler. Do you need this $900 Baldor long shaft buffer? No. This was a gift to me from a gunsmith that was, well, let's be honest, getting ready to die about 25 years ago, and I was smart enough to actually take it. Okay, so this is a straight conversion here on this piece. Straight conversion, no chemicals. All right, we didn't try to blue this. We just used the original rust. There is three-dimensional rust standing up on this. We're going to cover this when we get back to the bench. I'm going to show you. We've been asked before about how to deal with this. I've done shorts. I've done snippets. Don't worry. This is a conversion. We're really here, though, to do bluing. And this is what it looked like after it came out of the conversion tank. And then we go ahead and we hit this on the carding wheel. We knock that loose oxide off, and look at that. Is that sexy or what? I've washed my hands with soap before I started this, just to kind of keep the gratuitous finger oils off this in case we want to go and do another pass again. Can you do this in gloves? Yes. Well, most of you do it in gloves. Yes. Do I have thicker calluses, and can I flip a hamburger over without having it burn my fingers? Yes. So it's all just what your individual limitations are. However, you got to admit that that came out really nice, and that's a single pass. If we were to reapply the rusting chemicals again, it would take far longer for this part to rust up, because now it has a layer of oxide underneath it, excluding oxygen from the surface. By the time you get to possibly a third application, you're swimming upriver there. So just don't worry about it. So that came out pretty nice. And then here's the crane. Let's do the crane here and see if the crane came out. Now this is off of Bruno's. It's an Argentine constabulary revolver. It belonged to what amounted to the state cops of Buenos Aires, something or other. We'll look at that later. But that, look at that. Now that is where a rust blue will take you, right? Now in Bruno's case, we did not polish, bead blast, or take the old finish off the top. We merely degreased and went back in and caught the rust bluing back up again. And I defy you to see that. And when do we get that revolver done? That's going to be pretty sexy. All right, the rest of this is the bayonet, the locking collar off that bayonet. And that bayonet was nasty. So let's just see how that cleaned up. Oh, look at that. That turned jet black. So we'll take a look here. I should have left this as the control piece for the bayonet, but we're going to go grab the bayonet out of the water and stand by. This is as it came out of the conversion tank. All this was a fire blue before, but all that rust is gone. There was some rust up on the blade, and that little bit of ticky-tack rust is gone. And look at that. I mean, that came out right. So this is where the heavy rust was, down here on the shank. And we've converted all that rust, and it's coming out this beautiful black color. No chemicals were used here. This is just a straight conversion. The chemicals are what we use to induce the rust when we want it to rust. But if it already has, don't go straight to a wire wheel. Some of these collector guys have a point. Wire wheels ruin things. This is a carding wheel. And I'm going to tell you, there it is. That's the original color that was hiding underneath all of that brown mong. This is the original color of the blade. Right here, it matches. It's the same finish. That's patina. Patina is a layer of oiled rust. And that's what I have to say about that. So this is what I mean by having the side plate on when you're doing your carding. Because you do not want that side plate. You don't want to get up around the edges. Now you can see here, It didn't bite in some spots where there was some residual case coloring. We'll deal with that here in a little bit. The beauty of rust bluing over hot dip, you can't get this stuff to come off this gun without throwing sparks. You can't get this. This steel is blue. It's not a layer on top. The steel is actually blue, and it is incredibly durable. That is sexy, no? Look at that. Yeah, buddy. So we're done converting and carding, reapplying chemical, converting and carding. And here's kind of what the bottom metal on this particular double barrel shotgun looked like before we started. And there is where it winds up. You can really see it here on the bottom metal, the difference what we did. We did not strip this gun down to the white. In fact, none of the guns that we did here were stripped down to the white. So let's take a look at, this is a before and after on a Vetterli that we did. Same deal here. This whole gun was frosted up like that. And I don't know how well that's showing up, but this is almost like a fine-grained sandpaper. And then this is nice and smooth. No chemicals applied to this gun. Just a straight up jump into the conversion process and go. Here's the bottom metal. This bayonet looked like this, and now it looks like this. And the whole thing looks like it had been charcoal blued before, and it had been kept in a scabbard up to about here. And we just went in and converted all of that red oxide to a black oxide. If we had wanted to make this thing silver and polish it down bright, and it wasn't, but if we'd wanted to make it silver and it was orange, go to a black oxide first, because the black oxide is tenacious and protects the metal, but it's relatively easy to move. Red rust is hideous to get off. You got to grind it. Sparks are flying everywhere. Here, let's see. We already looked at the Vetterli. Let's look at something else. This old Lefevre was silver when this project started. Now, did I go all the way? No, I didn't. I wanted this Lefevre to look plausible. We had to do a lot of woodwork to it. We're not done cleaning up the screws. It had been case hardened, and you can see where it almost looks like it used to be, and just all the reds are gone out of the case hardening. It's plausible. But here's the crown jewel in this whole thing. Bruno's revolver. Okay. This is a Spanish copy of a Smith & Wesson, and it went from scroty looking white, having been buffed down, to extremely rusted, and then we converted. Don't panic when you see it in that rusted mode. It was converted out, wire wheeled twice. I did a little bit of work on the grips, but that's just because, well, Bruno knows a guy. But now we have it all in time. It opens, it closes. This particular gun was a little out of time when we found it, and this brass shim had been stuffed underneath the front end of the barrel here. So we went around one complete turn, which meant the gun got shorter. This shroud moved back, which meant I had to make the center pin here shorter. Everything had to get shorter. Some filing had to get done. But now the barrel's in tight, the pin's in it, and it's a good-looking piece of kit that's definitely in time if it isn't just a little bit loose and, well, Spanish and a bit jank. Guys, there are oils that are meant to oxidize and polymerize, and then there are oils that are designed specifically not to. So when we're talking about oiling a metal in order to fill up its pores, we're talking about just regular mineral oil that's designed to not oxidize, all right? So in this case, we're running, again, a small engine oil or something with no detergent in it. This stuff is like 30 weight. And we're just going to oil the whole gun down because we don't want additives in the oil that are designed to remove rust on this initial oiling. All right, so this gun is just going to be oiled, period. We're going to have to keep it wet throughout its life. I got a funny feeling that Bruno will probably put about a grand total of 5 rounds on this thing its entire life. He just has to have it. And here we go. So we just get the whole thing wet with a non-detergent oil the first time. After this finish hardens off, you can come back in with any one of a number of gun oils if you want to. This Lucas stuff is amazing. We've got the Freedom Lube. We've got everything you would need up there. But for the initial oil down after bluing, you want to have an oil that does not try to remove rust, that doesn't have any rust removers in it. So this is one thing you can do. This is a traditional treatment. The oil fills up the pores in the steel and denies oxygen access. And that's what we're trying to do, is keep the rust from beginning. Once it begins, all slathering oil on rust does is gives you patina. Another thing you can do to metals is wax them. There are a bunch of people that will talk about Renaissance wax. I've talked about using toilet bowl rings before. There's all kinds of things you can use. This is just I would use beeswax. This particular wax is designed for guys that make lost wax castings. Works pretty well for me, but you know, unless you're that guy down in Australia that sent to America for a toilet bowl ring and it came by way of China, just get something that has some kind of wax component in it. And then we're going to lay this in and we're going to fill the pores in this metal with this wax here. So we'll just get this warm to the point where it'll spread. We got to heat this bayonet up a little bit. This is that Springfield bayonet. It doesn't have to be too hot, just hot enough to melt the wax. There we go. There we go. The wax will disappear after a while once you get it all worked in. And what we're doing now is we're filling the pores with a substance that's excluding oxygen. Waxing is great when you're going to lay a gun up for a long time and you don't want a lot of dust and dirt in the pores. For everyday carry or for moderate use, waxing a gun, I don't know if it holds up very well. I'm sure people will disagree, but that's my opinion. So we've oiled, we've waxed, and now here's the one that's going to blow everybody's mind. Another way to do this is to use the darkest stock finish that you can find and rub it on and allow this oil to penetrate into the pores. And in this particular case, we want it to oxidize. And I do this on all my higher end jobs. And this is a interwar German double barrel. And we're just putting this on and we'll let it sit here for a little bit. And then we'll come back in and we'll wipe it off after it sets. So we're going to delay here for just a second. We're back in here after about 10 minutes of waiting. We froze the frame and came back in. And we're going to wipe the excess oil off of it. But you have to wait that 10 to 15 minutes. And you want to get it to where it's not leaving a fingerprint when you're rolling your finger on it. That's where you want to be. And it really brings out that sheen. It brings out that sheen in it. It's a great way for, I'm not going to say wall hangers, but I'm going to say for equipment that's not going to get run a whole lot, that is going to get looked at a lot more than it's going to get run. If you're going to take a gun out and run it every day, just straight up gun oil it. But if you want to preserve it a little bit, just remember that wax and a linseed oil that's been rubbed on and allowed to dry all the way and polymerize is actually a great way to protect steel when looks are more important than performance. Anyway, just to summarize, you can oil, you can wax, and you can use a polymerizing linseed oil on steel to protect it after it's been dealt with. Well, let's summarize. With any decent metal finishing or wood finishing job, the first step is prep. We have to prepare our surface for the finish that we're going to do. Prep can involve many things: sanding, bead blasting, polishing, buffing, grinding. Once we're done with prep, we've got to degrease. And then after we degrease, we apply chemicals. Once we have finished applying chemicals, we heat the part to prevent condensation. After we've done that, we turn on the steam and we allow the part to frog up. Then we convert and we take that red ferric oxide and turn it into ferroferric oxide. And finally, we card. Enough said. Do the maintenance. It's been a pleasure.